Blood pools beneath Zara's small body as Marcus Daniels stares at his motionless daughter. The police officers look unconcerned. His military training kicks in. 17 years of covert operations prepared him for many things, but not this. Now the entire Atlanta Police Department will pay. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you want to see more stories about justice and accountability, hit that like button and subscribe now. Can Marcus really take down an entire police department? Let's find out as we follow this former Navy SEAL's fight against a system designed to protect its own. Marcus Daniels never imagined his quiet life would explode into chaos on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. At 48 years old, the former Navy SEAL and intelligence operative had settled into a peaceful existence in Riverside, Alabama, a small community 30 miles outside Birmingham. His military days were behind him, replaced by work as a security consultant that allowed him to focus on raising his 15-year-old daughter, Zara. Their modest 3-bedroom home on Magnolia Street wasn't fancy, but it was theirs filled with photographs of Zara's mother, Alicia, who had succumbed to cancer 4 years earlier. The loss had devastated them both, but they'd found a way forward together. Marcus pouring all his energy into giving Zara the best life possible, despite the challenges she faced as a deaf black teenager in the South. Zara communicated primarily through American Sign Language, though she was also skilled at reading lips, a talent that served her well at the Alabama School for the Deaf, where she excelled in science and art. Her teachers called her a natural leader, with a bright future ahead, praising her resilience and determination. What they didn't see were the private lessons Marcus gave his daughter, teaching her situational awareness and basic self-defense techniques that he hoped she'd never need to use. Experience had taught him that the world could be especially cruel to those with multiple marginalized identities, and he was determined to prepare Zara for that reality, while still allowing her to maintain her natural optimism. Their comfortable routine began to shift 6 months ago, when William Caldwell took over as police chief of the Riverside Police Department. The new administration brought an influx of aggressive officers from other jurisdictions and implemented controversial policies that seemed specifically designed to target black neighborhoods. Marcus noticed the change. Immediately, patrol cars lingering on their street, officers watching black residents with suspicious eyes, traffic stops increasing exponentially for people who looked like him. He started documenting these incidents, his old intelligence training kicking in as he recorded times, badge numbers, and patterns of behavior. The first direct confrontation came when Zara's friend Jamal Washington was wrongfully detained outside the local mall. The 16-year-old honor student was thrown against a wall, handcuffed and searched because he matched the description of someone who had allegedly shoplifted. Marcus helped Jamal's parents file a formal complaint, meticulously gathering witness statements and security footage that clearly showed the officers had no probable cause. The complaint disappeared into administrative limbo, with Chief Caldwell personally assuring them it would be thoroughly investigated, even as his expression made it clear nothing would come of it. The incident left a sour taste in Marcus's mouth, but he chose to focus on protecting the kids rather than escalating the situation. He advised Zara and her friends to travel in groups, keep their phones ready to record, and always let someone know where they were going. For weeks, this cautious approach seemed to work, life returning to its familiar rhythm despite the underlying tension. Then came that fateful Tuesday. Zara had texted her father that morning, asking permission to stop at the library after school to finish a science project. Marcus agreed, reminding her to be home before dark, and to take her usual route through Jefferson Park, a path she'd walked safely for years. The spring afternoon was pleasant sunlight filtering through the oak trees as officers Richard Sullivan and Brett Cooper patrolled the park in response to a vague call about suspicious activity in the area. Sullivan, a stocky veteran with 12 years on the force and a history of complaints that never seemed to stick, spotted Zara walking alone on the path, her backpack slung over one shoulder as she focused on the ground ahead. "Hey you," he called out, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "Stop right there." Zara continued walking, completely unaware of the command, her attention caught by a cardinal landing on a nearby branch. "I said stop," Sullivan repeated louder, pulling his weapon, as Cooper moved to flank the teenager. Feeling a sudden prickle of awareness, Zara turned and saw the officers approaching, their faces stern and weapons drawn. Confusion and fear flashed across her features as she reached for her phone to text her father, her fingers fumbling with the device as she tried to understand what was happening. "She's got something," Sullivan shouted, misinterpreting her movements. "Drop it now." The words meant nothing to Zara, who could only see two angry officers pointing guns at her as she clutched her phone tighter, desperate to contact the one person who could explain that she couldn't hear them, that she wasn't a threat, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The gunshots echoed through Jefferson Park like thunder, two rapid explosions that sent birds scattering from the trees and pedestrians diving for cover. Officer Sullivan fired twice, the first bullet tearing through Zara's shoulder, spinning her around as the second struck her abdomen. She crumpled to the ground, her phone skittering across the pavement screen, shattering on impact. Blood quickly soaked through her light blue school shirt, creating a stark contrast against the pale concrete path. 20 yards away, college student Melissa Chen had been filming a nature video for her environmental science class when the commotion began. Instinctively, she pivoted her camera toward the unfolding scene, capturing Zara's frantic signing gestures just before the shots rang out. The footage clearly showed the teenager making the ASL sign for deaf, repeatedly, her expression desperate as she tried to communicate with the officers who couldn't or wouldn't understand. Across town, Marcus Daniels was reviewing security proposals for a new client when his phone buzzed with an alert from Zara's tracking app, indicating she had stopped moving for an extended period. A flutter of concern passed through him, but he reasoned she might be sitting in the library or taking a break in the park. When the second alert came through, this one from the emergency notification system showing police activity in Jefferson Park, his instincts screamed danger. He called Zara's phone, immediately stomach-dropping when it went straight to voicemail. Within minutes, Marcus was in his truck, speeding toward the park, running every red light between his office and his daughter. He arrived to find the area cordoned off with yellow police tape, a small crowd of onlookers gathered at the perimeter. Breaking into a run, he ducked under the tape, only to be intercepted by a uniformed officer who tried to block his path. "Sir, you can't go in there. This is an active crime scene." Marcus shoved past him, his focus locked on the small figure, lying motionless on the ground, surrounded by officers and paramedics. "That's my daughter," he shouted, his voice cracking as he pushed through the circle of uniforms. "Zara, Zara." He fell to his knees beside her, hands hovering over her blood-soaked clothing, afraid to touch her and cause more pain. "She's deaf," he explained frantically to the paramedics who were working to stabilize her. "She can't hear commands. She wouldn't have understood what they wanted." Before he could say more, Officer Cooper grabbed Marcus from behind, wrenching his arms back and cuffing him with brutal efficiency. "You're interfering with a police operation." Cooper growled, tightening the cuffs until they bit into Marcus's wrists. "Your daughter failed to comply with officer commands and made threatening movements." Marcus fought to control his rage, knowing that exploding now would only make things worse for Zara. "She's 15 years old and deaf," he repeated through clenched teeth. "She couldn't hear your commands. Check her medical ID bracelet." Sullivan stepped forward, face flushed with defensive anger. She pulled something from her pocket. "We followed protocol." The paramedics had loaded Zara onto a stretcher, her small form dwarfed by the equipment surrounding her. BP's dropping one called out, "We need to move now." "I'm going with her," Marcus insisted, struggling against Cooper's grip. "She'll be terrified if she wakes up alone. She needs me to sign to her." After a tense standoff, another officer finally removed the handcuffs, but Cooper made it clear that Marcus was not free to go. "We'll need your statement, and there will be officers at the hospital. This isn't over." Marcus climbed into the ambulance beside his daughter, taking her limp hand carefully between his own as the vehicle sped toward Riverside Memorial Hospital, siren wailing. Inside the emergency department, the controlled chaos of trauma care enveloped them. Doctors called out orders as nurses cut away Zara's clothing to assess her wounds. Marcus tried to stay close, but was repeatedly pushed back by staff needing access to his daughter. When a police officer positioned himself between Marcus and the trauma bay doors, effectively blocking his view, something inside him snapped. "She needs me in there," he demanded, stepping toward the officer. "I need to be there when she wakes up." "Hospital policy, sir," the officer replied flatly. "We need to secure the scene and ensure medical staff can work without interference." What the officer didn't say, but Marcus clearly understood, was that they were already constructing their narrative, already working to control the situation. A tall, black woman in surgical scrubs approached her authoritative presence, causing the officer to step aside slightly. "I'm Dr. Elaine Winters, Chief of Trauma Surgery," she introduced herself, extending a hand to Marcus. "Your daughter has suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to the right shoulder and one to the lower abdomen. The abdominal wound is our primary concern, as there appears to be internal bleeding. We're taking her to surgery immediately." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "You said she's deaf." Marcus nodded, grateful for the direct communication. "Yes, since birth. She uses ASL and reads lips." Dr. Winters turned to the officer. "This man needs to be present when his daughter regains consciousness. She'll be disoriented and frightened, especially if she can't communicate. I'm authorizing him to come to the surgical waiting area." The officer began to protest, but Dr. Winters cut him off with a sharp gesture. "This is my trauma department, officer. Your job is to protect and serve, not obstruct medical care." As Zara was wheeled toward the elevator, Dr. Winters promised to send regular updates and advised Marcus to prepare himself for a long wait. Left alone in the surgical waiting area, Marcus's military training kicked in. He forced himself to breathe deeply, to assess the situation logically rather than emotionally. He needed information, contacts, resources. He needed to understand exactly what had happened and why. When he stepped into the hallway to make a phone call, he overheard Officers Sullivan and Cooper speaking in low voices around a corner. "Just stick to the statement," Sullivan was saying tensely. "She made a sudden movement, reached for something in her pocket," we responded, according to training. "But the medical ID," Cooper replied, sounding less certain. "If we'd seen that bracelet—" "We didn't see it until afterward," Sullivan cut in firmly. "That's the official report. Caldwell's already putting out a statement backing us up. Just follow the protocol, and this will blow over like all the others." Marcus retreated silently, his mind racing. They were already building their defense, already closing ranks. By evening, local news stations were running. The police department's official statement claiming officers had responded to a threatening suspect who failed to comply with verbal commands and made suspicious movements consistent with reaching for a weapon. There was no mention of Zara's disability, her age, or the fact that what she'd reached for was her phone. Social media told a different story, with outrage building as community members shared information about Zara, describing her as a talented student who had never been in trouble. Hashtags demanding justice began trending locally, and small groups of protesters gathered outside the police precinct. Marcus received a text from an unfamiliar number as he sat beside Zara's bed in the ICU, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath, tubes and wires, connecting her to machines that beeped and hummed reassuringly. "Parking garage level 3, blue sedan, 20 minutes. Come alone. Friend from Kandahar." The reference to the Afghan city where Marcus had served confirmed the message came from someone from his military past. Thomas Reynolds was waiting in the car, looking much the same as he had 8 years ago when they'd last worked together, though with more gray in his close-cropped hair. "I heard what happened," he said without preamble as Marcus slid into the passenger seat. "How bad is it?" "She's stable after surgery. The shoulder wound was relatively clean, but the abdominal shot damaged her liver and caused significant blood loss. They're keeping her sedated for now." Marcus's voice was clinical, detached, the only way he could discuss his daughter's injuries without breaking down. "They're already covering it up, Tom. Changing reports, controlling the narrative." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Standard playbook. But they don't know who they're dealing with, do they?" He handed Marcus a burner phone and a small flash drive. "Secure communications, some resources you might need." "I've got people ready to help, Marcus. Just say the word." Marcus stared at the items in his hand, feeling the weight of the decision before him. Going against a corrupt police department would put both him and Zara at risk, but doing nothing was unthinkable. "I need to be smart about this," he said finally. "Strategic. They've got the power right now, but they've also got the weakness of any organization protecting itself at all costs. They'll make mistakes. "And you'll be there to capitalize on them," Reynolds replied with a grim smile. "Just like old times." When Marcus returned to the ICU, the night nurse informed him that Zara had briefly regained consciousness while he was gone, opening her eyes for a few moments before slipping back under. He took his place beside her bed, clutching her hand gently between his own. "I'm here, baby girl," he signed, though her eyes remained closed. "Daddy's here, and I promise you the people who did this will never hurt you or anyone else again." It wasn't just a father's empty promise to his injured child. It was a solemn vow, from a man who had spent nearly 2 decades in the shadows developing skills specifically designed to dismantle systems and organizations. The Riverside Police Department had just made the biggest mistake of their institutional life. They had given Marcus Daniels the one thing every operative needs to wage an effective campaign, an absolutely righteous cause. The morning after the shooting, Marcus sat in a small interview room at the Riverside Police Department, reviewing the typed statement he'd given immediately after arriving at the hospital. Something wasn't right. "This isn't what I said," he pointed out, pushing the paper back across the table toward Detective Wilson. "I specifically stated that my daughter was wearing a medical alert bracelet that identified her as deaf. That's not included here." The detective's expression remained neutral as he glanced at the document. "This is the statement you signed, Mr. Daniels." "I signed a handwritten statement in the hospital while my daughter was in surgery," Marcus countered. "This typed version has been altered." Detective Wilson gathered the papers with practiced indifference. "If you have concerns about the accuracy of your statement, you can file a supplemental report. Now, if there's nothing else we're done here." Outside the station, Marcus checked his phone to find dozens of notifications. The witness video that Melissa Chen had uploaded, showing Zara signing before being shot, had been removed from Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Melissa had posted that she was receiving content violation warnings and her accounts were being restricted. Local news outlets that had initially reported on the witness video were now only mentioning conflicting accounts from bystanders without showing any footage. Marcus recognized the pattern immediately, having seen similar information control tactics during his intelligence career. This was a coordinated effort to shape the narrative. His suspicions were confirmed when Police Chief William Caldwell appeared on the midday news broadcast, standing confidently behind a podium emblazoned with the Riverside Police Department shield. "Our officers responded appropriately to a potentially threatening situation," Caldwell stated firmly. The suspect made aggressive movements and refused multiple verbal commands to stop. "While we regret that the individual in question turned out to be a juvenile with a hearing impairment, our officers had no way of knowing this at the time and followed their training to protect themselves and the community." The only journalist who challenged this account was Vanessa Rodriguez from the Riverside Gazette, who pointedly asked Chief Caldwell witnesses report that Zara Daniels was making hand gestures that are consistent with American Sign Language. "Didn't your officers receive training on recognizing potential communication barriers?" Caldwell's expression hardened slightly. "Miss Rodriguez, in a rapidly evolving situation where officer safety is concerned, hand movements can be interpreted as threatening, especially when paired with non-compliance. The department stands by our officers' actions based on the information they had at the time." When Marcus attempted to file a formal complaint against Officers Sullivan and Cooper the next day, he encountered a bureaucratic maze seemingly designed to discourage and delay. Forms were missing, the complaint officer was unavailable, and when he finally managed to submit the paperwork, he was told it could take up to 90 days for the initial review. Later that afternoon, when Marcus requested the hospital security footage showing him being prevented from accessing his daughter, the hospital administrator informed him apologetically that there had been a system malfunction and the relevant footage had been lost. Too many coincidences, too many convenient failures, too many roadblocks appearing exactly where they would be most effective. Marcus recognized the signs of a system closing ranks to protect its own. That evening, he made 3 phone calls using the secure line Thomas had provided. Within 24 hours, his apartment became the base of operations for a small but highly skilled team. Carlos Mendez arrived first, a former NSA analyst who had worked with Marcus on digital intelligence operations in Eastern Europe. Short and perpetually disheveled with energy that seemed to vibrate from his slight frame, Carlos set up a sophisticated computer system on Marcus's dining room table. "They're good, but they're not that good," Carlos muttered as his fingers flew across multiple keyboards. The video was cached in several places before it was taken down. Just need to. He trailed off, lost in lines of code, before letting out a triumphant ha. An hour later, they were watching the recovered footage from Melissa Chen's phone. The video was damning, clearly showing Zara making the ASL sign for deaf repeatedly before reaching for her phone, followed by Sullivan drawing his weapon and firing without adequate warning. "This contradicts their entire narrative," Marcus observed, studying the footage carefully. "They claim she made threatening movements, but she was clearly trying to communicate her disability." Carlos nodded, already working on his next task. "I'm looking into Sullivan's record now. Officially, he's got a clean jacket, but let's see what's behind the curtain." His investigation revealed a pattern that made Marcus's blood boil. Officer Richard Sullivan had 5 previous excessive force complaints, all involving minority suspects, all mysteriously resolved with no disciplinary action. Even more, telling 2 of the incidents had involved individuals with disabilities: a Latino man with Parkinson's disease, whose tremors were interpreted as erratic behavior, and a black woman with a prosthetic leg who was thrown to the ground for suspicious movements while reaching for her cane. They buried all of this, Carlos confirmed, digging deeper into the department's digital records. There's a specific classification code they use for complaints they want to make disappear. Everything gets routed through Lieutenant Gregory Walsh in Internal Affairs and then poof gone into the administrative black hole. Their investigation was interrupted by a direct phone call from Chief Caldwell himself, his tone falsely cordial but underlined with unmistakable threat. "Mr. Daniels, I understand you've been making quite a few inquiries about department procedures and officer records. I'm exercising my rights as a citizen and as the father of a minor who was unjustly shot by your officers," Marcus replied evenly. "That's certainly your prerogative," Caldwell continued, "but I should warn you that interfering with an ongoing investigation is a serious offense. Officer Sullivan and Officer Cooper have received numerous threats since this unfortunate incident, and we're monitoring all potential sources of harassment very closely." The implication was clear: back off, or face consequences. Marcus had no intention of backing off, but he recognized the need for caution. The department was watching him, which meant he needed to be strategic about his next moves. The unexpected ally came in the form of Internal Affairs Officer Janet Lewis, who approached Marcus in the hospital parking garage 3 days after the shooting. "I can't be seen talking to you," she said quietly, keeping her face turned away from the security cameras. "But there are officers in the department who don't approve of what happened to your daughter or the way it's being handled. Sullivan has a history, and everyone knows it. The problem goes all the way to the top." She slipped him a thumb drive before walking away quickly. "Be careful where you open this. They're monitoring your devices." The drive contained performance reviews and internal memos revealing a departmental culture that protected officers like Sullivan and actively discouraged complaints from being properly investigated. One memo from Chief Caldwell explicitly instructed supervisors to manage community perceptions by reclassifying certain types of complaints as service inquiries to keep official misconduct numbers low. Marcus's training had taught him to anticipate counter-surveillance, but he was still unsettled to discover listening devices in his apartment and signs that his personal vehicle had been tampered with to allow tracking. They were watching him closely, which meant they felt threatened by what he might discover or reveal. He needed to be even more careful, more strategic, and several steps ahead of them at all times. The most difficult moment came when Zara finally regained full consciousness 5 days after the shooting. Marcus was beside her bed when her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition and then to fear as the memories returned. Her hands began to move frantically, signing her distress. "Why did they hurt me? What did I do wrong? Why did they shoot me?" Marcus had to blink back tears as he gently took her hands in his, waiting until she was calm enough to watch his response. "You did nothing wrong," he signed, clearly making sure she could see every movement. "The officers made a terrible mistake because they didn't understand you were deaf. but I promise you they will be held accountable for what they did." Her next question broke his heart. "Am I in trouble? Are they going to come back?" Before he could answer, his phone vibrated with a text message. When he checked it later, he found a simple warning: "Back off if you care about your daughter's safety. Next time won't be a mistake." They had crossed the final line. Are you frustrated by the injustice Zara and Marcus are facing? Type number 1 in the comments if you believe police departments need better training for interacting with deaf and disabled individuals. Hit that like button if you want to see Marcus expose the corruption in the Riverside Police Department, and subscribe to follow this story to its conclusion. What lengths do you think Marcus will go to in order to protect his daughter and get justice? Will Officer Sullivan face consequences for his actions, or will the department succeed in covering up the truth? Let's find out as Marcus gathers his forces and prepares to fight back against a system designed to protect its own. Marcus knew the threatening text message was no idle warning. The Riverside Police Department had already demonstrated their willingness to harm an innocent teenager, and now they were explicitly threatening to do worse if he continued pursuing justice. That night, while Zara slept under the watchful eye of a private nurse Marcus had hired, he implemented the first phase of his counteroffensive. By morning, Zara had been secretly transferred to a private medical facility in Birmingham, under an assumed name with security personnel vetted by Thomas Reynolds, stationed at all access points. The cover story at Riverside Memorial was that she had been moved to a specialized pediatric ward with restricted access, a misdirection that would buy them valuable time. Marcus established his new base of operations at a property owned by his former commanding officer, General Franklin Davidson, a sprawling farmhouse 30 miles outside of Riverside that offered both seclusion and multiple evacuation routes. The general, now retired but still maintaining significant connections in military and government circles, had offered the location without hesitation after hearing about Zara's situation. "They picked the wrong man to cross Davidson," had said gruffly. "Whatever you need, Marcus, it's yours." What Marcus needed was a team, and within 72 hours of Zara's relocation, he had assembled a formidable group of former colleagues with specialized skills. Diana Blackwell arrived first, a former intelligence specialist who had worked with Marcus on operations across 3 continents. Tall and imposing with keen analytical skills, Diana had left government service to work as a private investigator, specializing in corporate malfeasance. "Just like Bogota," she remarked with grim humor, as she surveyed the improvised command center they were setting up in the farmhouse's converted barn. "Except the corrupt officials have badges instead of diplomatic immunity." Michael Chen joined them next, a surveillance expert whose unassuming appearance belied his exceptional skills in tracking, monitoring, and counter-surveillance. During his time with the intelligence community, Michael had developed technology that could intercept communications considered unhackable by their creators. His equipment filled 3 large cases that he guarded more carefully than most people protected their children. "The Riverside PD might have resources, but they're not using anything. I can't crack," he assured Marcus, as he unpacked sophisticated listening devices and monitoring equipment. "Give me 48 hours, and we'll have ears inside their operation." James Wilson, a former military lawyer who had transitioned to civilian practice, specializing in civil rights violations, completed the core team. Meticulous and strategic, James had successfully litigated several high-profile cases against law enforcement agencies, earning a reputation as a relentless advocate for accountability. "What we're dealing with here is systematic," he explained, during their first strategy session. "Not just a couple of bad officers, but an entire department culture designed to protect misconduct and intimidate victims. We need to approach this like dismantling a criminal enterprise, because in many ways that's exactly what it is." With the team assembled, they began methodically gathering evidence and building a comprehensive picture of the corruption within the Riverside Police Department. Carlos's hacking skills proved invaluable as he gained access to the department's internal database, revealing a disturbing pattern of excessive force incidents disproportionately targeting minority residents. "They've created internal codes to flag certain complaints for special handling," he explained, showing the team his findings. Anything involving officers in Caldwell's inner circle gets routed to Lieutenant Walsh, who makes sure it disappears. I've identified 17 cases in the past year alone, where excessive force complaints were reclassified as unfounded, despite substantial evidence supporting the allegations. Diana's investigation revealed that the network of corruption extended beyond Sullivan and Cooper to a core group of officers led by Lieutenant Gregory Walsh, a 20-year veteran who had served alongside Caldwell in another department before following him to Riverside. Walsh is the enforcer, Diana reported. He handles the dirty work, makes problems disappear, and keeps the rank and file in line. The officers either follow the program or find themselves assigned to the worst beats with no backup when they need it. The most disturbing discovery came when Carlos uncovered financial connections between Chief Caldwell Lieutenant Walsh and State Senator Raymond Harrison, a powerful politician who chaired the Public Safety Committee and controlled significant funding for law enforcement agencies across the state. Bank records showed regular payments from a construction company owned by Harrison's brother-in-law to shell companies that ultimately benefited both Caldwell and Walsh. It's sophisticated money laundering, Carlos confirmed. Small enough to stay under the radar. But over the past 3 years, Caldwell has received nearly $300,000 in payouts, disguised as consulting fees and investment returns. While the team built their case against the department, Marcus reached out to community leaders who had been fighting police brutality and discrimination for years. Reverend Calvin Jackson of the First Baptist Church had organized previous protests against the department and readily agreed to help coordinate community support for Zara. This could be the case that finally breaks through, Reverend Jackson told Marcus during a meeting at the church. A deaf child posing no threat, clearly trying to communicate her disability shot without justification, and then the department closing ranks to protect the officers. It crystallizes everything we've been fighting against. Together they organized peaceful protests outside the police headquarters and City Hall, keeping constant pressure on local officials while Marcus's team worked behind the scenes. The Daniels family wasn't alone in their fight against the department. Marcus met with other families who had experienced similar injustices, collecting testimonies that revealed a clear pattern of misconduct and cover-ups. The mother of Jamal Washington, the teenager who had been wrongfully detained at the mall, provided security footage she had managed to obtain before it could be lost. The brother of a man who died in Riverside police custody shared autopsy photos that contradicted the official report. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, creating a damning picture of systemic abuse. The police department responded with intimidation tactics, both subtle and overt. Diana discovered her apartment had been broken into and ransacked, though nothing of value was taken. Michael reported being followed by unmarked police cars whenever he left the farmhouse. Anonymous threats were posted on the Justice for Zara social media pages, and participants in the protests found themselves receiving tickets for minor infractions like parking violations and broken taillights. Despite these attempts at intimidation, public pressure continued to build, especially after Vanessa Rodriguez published a detailed article in the Riverside Gazette questioning the official narrative of the shooting. Using anonymous sources from within the department, Rodriguez revealed that Officer Sullivan had a history of aggressive behavior toward minorities, and that his body camera had mysteriously malfunctioned during the encounter with Zara. The article created enough controversy that the department was forced to respond, placing Sullivan and Cooper on administrative leave pending an investigation, though Caldwell made it clear in his statement that this was merely a formality, and that he had complete confidence in the officer's account of the incident. Senator Harrison held a press conference shortly afterward calling for a swift end to the unfounded accusations against our brave officers, and suggesting that outside agitators were exploiting the situation to push an anti-police agenda. His involvement confirmed the team's suspicions about the depth of the corruption they were facing. While Marcus coordinated these efforts, he split his time between the Farmhouse Command Center and Zara's hospital room in Birmingham. Her physical condition was improving steadily, the excellent care at the private facility accelerating her recovery, but the psychological trauma remained evident. She experienced panic attacks whenever she saw someone in a uniform, and nightmares frequently disrupted her sleep. During his visits, Marcus would sign with her for hours, reassuring her that she was safe and that justice would be served. Through Carlos's continued investigation of police records, they discovered a directive issued 2 months before the shooting that instructed officers to maintain an aggressive presence in predominantly black neighborhoods with specific orders to proactively engage suspicious individuals and establish departmental authority through visible enforcement actions. The language was carefully crafted to avoid explicitly targeting minorities, but the implementation had been almost exclusively focused on Black and Latino communities. This evidence of discriminatory policing practices strengthened their case, substantially providing context for the institutional failures that had led to Zara's shooting. As they gathered momentum, Marcus narrowly escaped a potentially fatal accident when the brakes on his SUV failed while he was driving down a steep hill outside Riverside. Only his defensive driving training prevented a catastrophic crash, and subsequent investigation by Michael confirmed that the brake lines had been deliberately cut in a professional manner designed to make the failure appear natural. The message was clear: the department was escalating its efforts to silence him. They were running scared, and that made them dangerous. But it also meant Marcus was getting close to something they desperately wanted to hide. "They wouldn't be trying this hard to stop us if we weren't on the right track," Marcus told his team after the brake incident. "We need to push harder, move faster. They're making mistakes now, and each mistake gives us another thread to pull." Chief Caldwell stood before a forest of microphones in the Riverside Police Department's press briefing room, his freshly pressed uniform adorned with polished badges and medals from his 30 years in law enforcement. Behind him, a carefully arranged backdrop of American flags and police insignia created an image of authority and patriotism. After a thorough internal review of the officer-involved shooting on April 12th, the Riverside Police Department has determined that Officer Richard Sullivan and Officer Brett Cooper acted in accordance with departmental policies and training. Caldwell announced with practiced solemnity. While we acknowledge the unfortunate outcome of this incident, the officers responded appropriately to what they reasonably perceived as a threat to their safety and the safety of the community. The press conference had been strategically scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Monday timing that ensured maximum news coverage while providing minimal opportunity for community organizers to mobilize a significant protest presence. The reporters present were mostly from friendly local outlets, with troublesome journalists like Vanessa Rodriguez conspicuously absent from the invitation list. Marcus watched the broadcast from the farmhouse, his expression hardening as Caldwell continued his statement. Furthermore, the department has uncovered evidence of a coordinated campaign to intimidate and harass our officers based on deliberately misleading information about this incident. We have filed charges against Marcus Daniels for evidence tampering and interference with an official investigation, and a warrant has been issued for his arrest. The announcement sent a jolt through the team gathered around the television. "They're getting desperate," James Wilson observed, already making notes for their legal countermoves. Filing charges against the victim's father is a classic intimidation tactic, but it also shows they're afraid of what we're uncovering. The arrest warrant forced Marcus to operate even more covertly, limiting his movements and requiring additional security measures whenever he visited Zara. But it also created an opportunity, as the department's aggressive posture attracted attention from regional civil rights organizations and independent media outlets, who began questioning why such extraordinary measures were being taken against a father seeking justice for his injured child. Carlos's continuing digital investigation yielded another crucial piece of the puzzle when he discovered financial records showing substantial donations from police unions across the state to Senator Raymond Harrison's campaign, fund totaling over $2 million in the past 5 years. Even more damning was video footage from a private fundraiser 3 years earlier, where Harrison had been recorded making racially charged comments about crime in minority communities, suggesting that aggressive policing was the only language these people understood. "This connects all the dots," Diana explained as they reviewed the evidence. Harrison secures funding and political protection for Caldwell's department. Caldwell implements Harrison's vision of aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods, and Walsh makes sure any complaints disappear. Meanwhile, Harrison's brother-in-law's construction company gets lucrative municipal contracts and kickbacks flow to everyone involved. The system was fighting back with every weapon at its disposal. Local news outlets began running stories, questioning Marcus's mental stability, citing anonymous sources who claimed his military service had left him with PTSD and paranoid tendencies. His service record was selectively leaked to the press, with classified missions reframed as evidence of a troubling history of violence and specialized training described as making him potentially dangerous. Most insidious were the rumors spread through social media, suggesting that Zara had been involved in drug-related activity in the park, implying she had brought the shooting on herself. These smears were quickly debunked by her school records and character testimonials from teachers and friends, but the allegations lingered in public discourse, repeated by those looking for any reason to justify the officer's actions. The team's most valuable inside source, Janet Lewis from Internal Affairs, provided crucial documentation about previous cover-ups, but paid a heavy price for her integrity. She was discovered passing information and immediately suspended pending an investigation for mishandling confidential departmental information. Before her department credentials were revoked, she managed to copy additional files implicating Walsh and Caldwell in systematically burying misconduct complaints. With Janet's help, Marcus's team arranged a safe house where she could continue providing information without fear of department retaliation. The fight expanded beyond Marcus and the police department when Zara's school friends organized a student protest walking out of classes to gather outside City Hall with signs demanding justice. The police response was disproportionate and aggressive, with officers in riot gear confronting teenagers and forcing them to disperse using threats of arrest. Video of officers shoving students and confiscating phones spread quickly across social media, further undermining the department's already damaged public image. Vanessa Rodriguez faced her own professional consequences for continuing to investigate the case. After her newspaper received pressure from advertisers with connections to Senator Harrison, she was abruptly fired for alleged violations of journalistic standards in her reporting on the Zara Daniels case. Rather than silence her, the firing freed Rodriguez to work directly with Marcus's team, bringing her investigative skills and media connections to their cause. "They've been trying to kill this story since day one," she told Marcus when she joined their operation. "That tells me there's something even bigger. They're hiding something beyond just protecting a couple of officers or covering up one shooting." Her instincts proved correct when the team identified a potential whistleblower within the department. Officer Kevin Martinez had been present during several incidents where misconduct was covered up, including a meeting where Lieutenant Walsh explicitly instructed officers on how to clean up reports involving excessive force. Martinez had privately expressed concerns to colleagues about the department's practices, but had been afraid to come forward officially. Through Janet Lewis, Marcus's team established contact with Martinez and arranged for him to provide a sworn statement detailing the systematic nature of the corruption. Before he could complete the statement, however, Martinez was arrested on fabricated charges of evidence tampering and theft of department property. The timing made it clear that someone had tipped off Walsh about Martinez's intentions. With Martinez in custody and at risk of serious harm, Marcus had to make a difficult decision. "We need to get him out," he told the team during an emergency meeting. "Every minute he's in their hands, he's in danger. They know he can bring down the entire house of cards." The extraction plan was dangerous and legally questionable, but Marcus saw no alternative. Using his military training, and with support from his team, he orchestrated a precision operation during Martinez's transfer between the county jail and the courthouse for his arraignment. Michael disabled the transport vehicle's communications system. Diana created a diversion that separated the transport from its escort vehicles, and Marcus intercepted the van at a predetermined location, neutralizing the guards with non-lethal tactics before freeing Martinez. The operation was completed in under 3 minutes with no serious injuries, but it made national news with headlines describing a military-style assault on law enforcement and a dangerous escalation in the Riverside controversy. Martinez was taken to a secure location out of state where he provided a comprehensive video deposition detailing years of misconduct, cover-ups, and corruption within the department. His testimony included specific instances where Officer Sullivan had used excessive force against minorities with the explicit approval of Lieutenant Walsh and Chief Caldwell. Most damning was Martinez's account of Sullivan's previous shooting incidents involving minority suspects, which had resulted in minimal disciplinary action despite clear evidence of policy violations. In one case, Sullivan had shot an unarmed black teenager who was running away from a traffic stop, claiming he feared for his safety despite the victim being 15 feet away and posing no threat. The escalating public attention forced Chief Caldwell and Senator Harrison to hold another joint press conference, this one announcing a major operation to apprehend Marcus Daniels, who was now labeled a domestic terrorist who had declared war on law enforcement. Harrison pledged state resources to support the manhunt, while Caldwell assured the public that this dangerous individual will be brought to justice swiftly and decisively. What neither man realized was that their very public campaign against Marcus was only strengthening public skepticism about their motives. As community organizers pointed out, the department seemed far more concerned with silencing Marcus Daniels than with addressing the circumstances that led to a deaf teenager being shot. Every press conference, every new charge, every escalation only reinforced the perception that the Riverside Police Department had something serious to hide. "They're overplaying their hand," James observed as they watched Harrison's latest televised tirade against Marcus and his supporters. Public opinion is shifting. People are asking why a father seeking justice for his daughter is being treated like public enemy number one, especially when the officers who shot her are on paid leave instead of facing charges. Marcus knew the fight was far from over. The system had significant resources and a vested interest in maintaining its power. But he also knew that systems built on corruption were inherently unstable, vulnerable to exposure once the first cracks appeared. And the cracks in the Riverside Police Department were growing larger by the day. The manhunt for Marcus Daniels dominated local news, with Chief Caldwell appearing on camera daily to update the public on the intensive ongoing operation to apprehend a dangerous fugitive. Roadblocks appeared on major highways. Officers conducted door-to-door searches in predominantly black neighborhoods, and wanted posters featuring Marcus's military ID photo were plastered across the city. The massive police response created precisely the climate of fear and intimidation that Caldwell intended, but it also stretched the department's resources thin and forced officers to abandon their usual careful procedures. Marcus and his team had anticipated this reaction and prepared accordingly. Their secure base at General Davidson's farmhouse was compromised within days of Martinez's extraction, forcing them to split up and operate from multiple locations, using a rotating schedule of safe houses. Zara was moved for a third time now, under the direct protection of Dr. Elaine Winters, who had taken personal leave from the hospital to ensure her patient's safety. They're watching medical facilities and transportation routes, Dr. Winters warned during a secure call with Marcus. "But I've arranged a private residence with appropriate medical equipment. She's stable physically, but the psychological trauma remains significant. She needs to see you soon." The separation from his daughter weighed heavily on Marcus, but he knew that maintaining distance temporarily was necessary for both their safety. The team suffered a significant setback when police raided an apartment Carlos had been using as a digital operations center, seizing servers containing much of their evidence. Carlos had escaped minutes before the raid alerted by one of Michael's surveillance countermeasures, but the loss of the physical hardware was a blow to their investigation. "I maintained off-site backups of the critical files," Carlos assured the team during their next secure communication. "But we've lost access to some of the raw data, and they'll be watching cloud services and data centers for any attempt to retrieve the information." Working from a series of temporary locations, Carlos frantically secured their remaining digital evidence while trying to restore access to the police department's internal systems. His task was made more difficult by the department's sudden implementation of enhanced cybersecurity measures, clearly a response to their previous infiltration. While the technical aspects of their operation faced challenges, Marcus pursued a legal strategy in parallel. He arranged a clandestine meeting with Benjamin Grant, a prominent civil rights attorney known for successfully challenging police misconduct cases across the South. The meeting took place at midnight in the basement of a church sympathetic to their cause, with Reverend Jackson providing security and ensuring no uninvited guests could access the building. "What you're describing goes beyond a single incident of excessive force," Grant observed, after reviewing the evidence they had gathered. "This is a pattern of systematic civil rights violations, potentially rising to the level of a criminal conspiracy. I can file a federal lawsuit on Zara's behalf that will force disclosure of documents the department is currently hiding." Grant agreed to represent Zara immediately, but within hours of accepting the case, the intimidation began. His law office received anonymous threatening phone calls. His home was vandalized with spray-painted messages, calling him a cop hater, and his children were followed on their way to school by unmarked vehicles. Despite these attempts to frighten him away from the case, Grant proceeded with the federal filing, using the evidence provided by Marcus's team to craft a comprehensive complaint alleging constitutional violations, discrimination, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The legal filing attracted the attention of the FBI, with Agent Sarah Mitchell assigned to investigate the allegations of civil rights violations. Unlike the local and state authorities who had aligned themselves with the Riverside Police Department, Mitchell approached the case with professional detachment and a genuine interest in uncovering the truth. Her initial review of the evidence suggested there was merit to the claims against the department, particularly regarding the pattern of excessive force against minorities and the apparent efforts to obstruct investigations into officer misconduct. Through a secure intermediary, Mitchell requested a meeting with Marcus to discuss potential cooperation with the federal investigation. After careful vetting to ensure the request wasn't a trap, Marcus agreed to meet the agent at a neutral location outside FBI jurisdiction. "I'm not here to arrest you, Mr. Daniels," Mitchell clarified at the beginning of their conversation. "I'm investigating possible civil rights violations by the Riverside Police Department. Based on my preliminary review, there appear to be significant issues with their use of force policies and internal accountability mechanisms." Marcus provided Mitchell with copies of evidence his team had gathered, including Officer Martinez's testimony and the financial connections between Chief Caldwell, Lieutenant Walsh, and Senator Harrison. Mitchell promised to pursue these leads independently and to provide federal protection for key witnesses, including Martinez, whose extraction from police custody she diplomatically described as an unfortunate, but perhaps understandable, response to extraordinary circumstances. While Marcus worked to build the federal case, his team uncovered evidence that Lieutenant Walsh and Officer Sullivan were planning to plant drugs in Zara's hospital room to support their narrative that she had been involved in criminal activity at the time of the shooting. Michael's surveillance network intercepted text messages between the officers discussing the operation, giving the team time to set up counter-surveillance in the new medical facility where Zara was recovering. When Walsh and another officer arrived disguised as hospital maintenance workers, they were captured on video attempting to plant evidence in Zara's personal belongings. The officers fled when confronted by security, but the video evidence of their attempted frame job provided another damning piece of the puzzle. The manhunt for Marcus intensified, with SWAT teams raiding locations across the city based on supposed sightings. Marcus had several near misses, once escaping through a restaurant kitchen minutes before officers stormed the building another time, hiding in plain sight as police searched a park where he had arranged to meet a contact. The pressure was relentless, but it also created unexpected allies. Community members began refusing to cooperate with police searches. Business owners denied officers access to security footage, and local journalists started questioning the disproportionate resources being dedicated to finding one man, while violent crimes went uninvestigated in many neighborhoods. National civil rights organizations took notice of the situation, sending representatives to Riverside and holding press conferences condemning the department's actions. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund offered additional resources to support Zara's lawsuit, and deaf advocacy groups organized protests, highlighting the department's failure to train officers in recognizing and communicating with deaf individuals. As public pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in the department's unified front. Officer Brett Cooper, who had been present during Zara's shooting but had not fired his weapon, contacted Marcus's team through Vanessa Rodriguez, expressing interest in making a deal. Sullivan has a history with deaf people that nobody knows about, Cooper revealed during a tense meeting in a motel outside the city. He specifically targets them because they can't hear his commands, which gives him an excuse to escalate. He calls them easy points because the complaints never stick. There's at least 3 other incidents that got buried. Cooper agreed to wear a wire to record conversations with Sullivan and Walsh, hoping to capture explicit admissions about the cover-up and potentially reduce his own legal exposure. The operation was set for a shift change at the precinct, when Cooper would have the opportunity to speak privately with Sullivan in the locker room. The plan went catastrophically wrong. Whether through carelessness or betrayal, Cooper's wire was discovered during the conversation, leading to a violent confrontation. Hours later, Cooper was found severely beaten in an alley behind a bar, frequented by officers barely clinging to life with multiple fractures and internal bleeding. The attack on Cooper represented both a crisis and an opportunity. The brutality of the assault on a fellow officer clearly meant as a warning to others who might consider breaking ranks, shocked even department loyalists. Local news covered the story extensively, with sources inside the hospital leaking details of Cooper's injuries that contradicted the department's claim that he had been attacked by unknown assailants, possibly connected to Marcus Daniels. Even officers who had supported Caldwell's administration began questioning the direction of the department, with rumors of dissension in the ranks reaching Marcus through his network of informants. Agent Mitchell, recognizing the significance of Cooper's attempted cooperation and subsequent assault, moved quickly to place him under federal protection in the hospital, stationing FBI agents outside his room and making it clear that any further attempts to silence him would have serious consequences. As Cooper recovered enough to provide a formal statement, Mitchell contacted Marcus again, this time with a proposal that could potentially shift the entire dynamic of the conflict. The Bureau is prepared to offer you conditional immunity in exchange for your full cooperation with our investigation, she explained during their secure call. We believe the corruption within the Riverside Police Department extends beyond excessive force. Incidents potentially involving financial crimes, civil rights violations, and conspiracy against rights. Your expertise and the evidence your team has gathered could be instrumental in building a comprehensive federal case. Marcus weighed the offer, carefully conscious of the risks and potential benefits. Cooperation with the FBI would provide resources and legal protection that his team desperately needed, but it would also mean surrendering some control over the investigation and potentially compromising some of their more unorthodox methods of gathering evidence. The decision became clearer as he considered Zara's well-being and the broader goal of systemic change. Personal vengeance against the officers who had hurt his daughter might be temporarily satisfying, but transforming the department and preventing future victims required the kind of institutional power that only a federal investigation could bring to bear. Are you shocked by how far the police department is willing to go to cover up their actions? Type number 1 in the comments. If you believe federal intervention is necessary when local police departments become this corrupt. Hit that like button if you want to see Marcus team up with Agent Mitchell to bring down the entire corrupt system, and subscribe to see how this high-stakes battle for justice unfolds. Will Cooper's testimony be enough to crack the case wide open? Can Marcus trust the FBI to pursue justice rather than just making a few token arrests? And most importantly, will Zara ever feel safe again in her own community? The walls are closing in. But the question remains on whom? Agent Sarah Mitchell moved with decisive efficiency once Marcus agreed to cooperate with the federal investigation. Within hours, she had arranged for Cooper to be transferred to a secure medical facility with round-the-clock FBI protection. Despite his serious injuries, Cooper provided a formal statement detailing years of misconduct within the department, with particular focus on Officer Sullivan's history of targeting vulnerable individuals and Lieutenant Walsh's systematic efforts to bury complaints. Cooper's testimony was damning, describing in precise detail how Walsh maintained 2 sets of records for certain officers, how Chief Caldwell personally reviewed and approved the falsification of reports in excessive force cases, and how Senator Harrison intervened whenever outside investigations threatened to expose the department's practices. Sullivan specifically boasted about targeting deaf people, Cooper stated in his recorded deposition. He said they were perfect because they couldn't hear commands, so he could always claim non-compliance. He called it shooting fish in a barrel and laughed about it. Walsh knew, Caldwell knew. They all knew, and they promoted him anyway. With Cooper's testimony secured, national media finally broke through the local information control efforts. Major networks sent correspondents to Riverside covering the allegations of systemic corruption and civil rights violations with a level of scrutiny the department had never previously faced. CNN aired a special report featuring interviews with multiple victims of police misconduct, including families of individuals who had been subjected to excessive force by Officer Sullivan. The collective weight of these stories, combined with the visual impact of Zara's youthful face on screen, created a narrative that resonated far beyond Riverside's city limits. Protests spread to multiple cities across the state, with demonstrators carrying signs demanding justice for Zara and accountability for the officers involved in her shooting. The hashtag number #JusticeForZara trended nationally, bringing unprecedented attention to the case and the broader issues of police interactions with deaf and disabled individuals. As public pressure mounted, Marcus worked closely with Agent Mitchell to build a comprehensive federal case against the department. His team's evidence, combined with the FBI's resources and legal authority, created a formidable investigative force. Mitchell obtained federal warrants that gave them access to department records that had previously been hidden financial documents, showing the flow of money between Harrison's political operation and department leadership, communications that revealed the coordination of the cover-up effort. While Marcus coordinated with the federal investigation, the situation within the Riverside Police Department grew increasingly chaotic. Officer Sullivan, recognizing the shifting tide, went into hiding with assistance from Lieutenant Walsh. His disappearance further undermined the department's credibility, with Chief Caldwell struggling to explain why an officer supposedly innocent of wrongdoing would suddenly abandon his post and drop out of contact. Caldwell's public appearances became increasingly erratic. During one particularly disastrous press conference, he contradicted his previous statements about the shooting first, claiming that Sullivan had activated his body camera as required by policy, then minutes later insisting that the camera had malfunctioned due to technical issues beyond the officer's control. When a reporter pointed out the inconsistency, Caldwell abruptly ended the conference and refused to take further questions. Senator Harrison, ever the political survivor, began distancing himself from the embattled police department. In a carefully worded statement, he expressed grave concerns about the troubling allegations and called for a thorough and transparent investigation, conveniently omitting his years of protecting the department from oversight and accountability. Harrison's attempt to reposition himself came too late to save his political career. Marcus's team discovered financial records showing that Caldwell, Walsh, and Sullivan had been embezzling from the department's budget for years, using a sophisticated scheme involving inflated equipment purchases, ghost employees on the lighter, the payroll, and fraudulent overtime claims. The money was traced to offshore accounts and properties held under shell companies with a clear paper trail leading back to the officers. This financial angle gave the FBI additional leverage as financial crimes fell squarely within federal jurisdiction and carried significant penalties. General Franklin Davidson, Marcus's former commanding officer, made a public statement supporting Marcus's character and questioning the department's claims about his actions. "I've known Marcus Daniels for 20 years, the decorated general told reporters. He's one of the most honorable men I've ever served with, dedicated to protecting the innocent and upholding the values this country was founded on. If he says there's corruption in the Riverside Police Department, you can take that to the bank." Other military colleagues came forward with similar testimonials, creating a stark contrast between Marcus's record of distinguished service and the department's portrayal of him as a dangerous extremist. More officers from within the department began coming forward, initially anonymously and then with increasing boldness as federal protection was extended to whistleblowers. They described a culture of fear and intimidation, where officers who questioned excessive force or discriminatory practices were relegated to undesirable assignments or subjected to harassment by Walsh and his allies. One sergeant revealed that officers were explicitly instructed to be more aggressive in minority neighborhoods and to maximize arrests and citations to meet unofficial quotas that generated revenue for the city. The accumulated evidence was presented to a federal grand jury which convened to consider charges against multiple officers and officials. The proceedings were confidential, but sources close to the investigation indicated that the grand jury was examining potential charges including civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and financial crimes. As the legal process advanced, Zara made significant progress in her physical recovery. The gunshot wound to her shoulder had healed well enough for her to resume using sign language fluently, though she still experienced pain and limited range of motion that would require ongoing physical therapy. The abdominal wound had been more serious, requiring multiple surgeries to repair internal damage, but her youth and previously excellent health contributed to a recovery that her doctors described as remarkable. The psychological trauma proved more persistent than the physical injuries. Zara experienced nightmares, anxiety attacks, and hypervigilance that made returning to normal activities challenging. Working with a therapist specializing in trauma and deaf communication, she gradually began processing her experience and rebuilding her sense of security. A breakthrough came when she agreed to make a video statement about the shooting and its aftermath, communicating in ASL with subtitles added for wider distribution. "I was walking home from school like I did every day." She signed her expressions, conveying the emotional weight of her words more powerfully than verbal language could have. "I saw the police officers coming toward me with angry faces. I tried to tell them I was deaf by signing, but they looked even angrier. When I reached for my phone to text my dad, they shot me. I didn't understand what I had done wrong. I still don't understand why they wanted to hurt me." The video went viral, accumulating millions of views within days of its release. The deaf community rallied around Zara's case, bringing national attention to issues of police interactions with deaf individuals. Advocacy organizations highlighted the lack of training most departments provided for officers on recognizing and communicating with deaf people, pushing for legislation requiring such training as a basic component of police certification. Marcus and Benjamin Grant filed a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit against the Riverside Police Department, the city, and the individual officers involved in Zara's shooting and the subsequent cover-up. The complaint detailed not only the specific circumstances of the shooting, but the broader pattern of discriminatory policing and civil rights violations that had fostered an environment where such incidents were inevitable. The lawsuit sought both monetary damages for Zara and institutional reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. The Department of Justice announced a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Riverside Police Department, a rare and significant step that indicated serious concerns about systematic civil rights violations. Such investigations typically examine departmental policies, training protocols, use of force guidelines, and internal accountability mechanisms with the power to impose mandatory reforms if deficiencies were identified. The announcement sent shockwaves through city government, with the mayor and city council suddenly eager to demonstrate their commitment to police reform after years of ignoring community complaints. Lieutenant Gregory Walsh, sensing that the department's unified front was crumbling, made a desperate attempt to save himself by offering to provide evidence against his superiors. Through his attorney, he contacted Marcus and Agent Mitchell, proposing a deal whereby he would testify against Chief Caldwell and Senator Harrison in exchange for consideration in his own case. "Walsh is a snake," Marcus commented when Mitchell informed him of the offer. "But he's a snake who kept detailed records of everything. If he's willing to turn on Caldwell and Harrison, he must have something significant." The tide had turned. What had begun as one father's fight for justice for his daughter had evolved into a multifaceted campaign that threatened to expose and dismantle decades of corruption. The walls that had once closed in on Marcus were now closing in on those who had tried to silence him, and the system that had protected them for so long was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own corruption. The meeting with Lieutenant Walsh took place in a nondescript federal building 50 miles outside Riverside, the location chosen for security and to avoid media attention. Walsh arrived with his attorney, his normally commanding presence diminished by the circumstances. The man who had intimidated subordinates and manipulated evidence with impunity now looked small and nervous, constantly adjusting his tie and darting glances around the conference room. Agent Mitchell began the session by outlining the potential charges. Walsh faced a sobering list that included obstruction of justice, conspiracy against rights witness tampering, and financial crimes that collectively carried potential sentences of decades in federal prison. "We're prepared to consider cooperation in sentencing recommendations," she explained, her tone professional but unyielding. "But that depends entirely on the value of the information you provide and your willingness to testify against others involved." Walsh's attorney had negotiated limited immunity for the information provided during this initial meeting, allowing his client to speak freely without fear that his statements would be used directly against him if the cooperation agreement fell through. After consulting quietly with his lawyer, Walsh began revealing the extent of the corruption that had infected not just the police department, but the entire Riverside power structure. "This goes beyond the department," he stated, sliding a USB drive across the table. "The mayor, the city manager, half the city council, they're all involved. This has been going on for 15 years, since before Caldwell took over." The drive contained thousands of documents, internal memos, financial records, email exchanges, and recorded conversations that Walsh had meticulously preserved as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. The material painted a devastating picture of a coordinated effort to use aggressive policing in minority neighborhoods as a revenue generation tool for the city. They called it resource optimization. Walsh explained his tone, a mix of defiance and rationalization. The directive came directly from the mayor's office: increase arrests and citations in certain neighborhoods to generate revenue through fines, court costs, and forfeited property. It was all about the money. The documents revealed a quota system that incentivized officers to make arrests in predominantly Black and Latino areas, with performance evaluations and promotion opportunities tied directly to these metrics. Officers who generated the most revenue through citations and arrests received preferential assignments and overtime opportunities, while those who questioned the practices were sidelined or forced out. "Sullivan was the golden boy because he never hesitated," Walsh continued. "Any excuse to escalate a situation, any opportunity to make an arrest or issue multiple citations, he took it. That's why we protected him, why his complaints were buried. He was producing exactly the results the system wanted." The most damning evidence concerned the coordination between Senator Harrison Chief Caldwell and city officials to conceal the discriminatory nature of these practices. Harrison had used his position on the State Public Safety Committee to block legislation that would have required greater transparency in policing metrics, while simultaneously securing state funding that subsidized the department's aggressive tactics. In exchange, Harrison's political allies received favorable treatment from the department, and his brother-in-law's construction company was awarded lucrative municipal contracts without competitive bidding. While Marcus and Agent Mitchell worked to verify and analyze Walsh's information, the FBI was tracking Officer Sullivan's movements. He had fled to a remote cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, owned by a police union official, apparently believing the isolated location would keep him beyond the reach of federal authorities. The FBI raid to apprehend him was met with unexpected resistance, as Sullivan barricaded himself inside and opened fire on the agents. The ensuing standoff lasted for nearly 6 hours before Sullivan was wounded in an exchange of gunfire and finally surrendered. He was airlifted to a secure medical facility and placed under guard while receiving treatment for non-life-threatening injuries. News of Sullivan's armed resistance to arrest and Walsh's cooperation with federal authorities created a political earthquake in Riverside. Senator Harrison hastily called a press conference to announce his resignation from office, citing vague health concerns that required his full attention. The mayor issued a statement expressing shock at the allegations and pledging complete cooperation with federal investigators, despite being implicated in Walsh's testimony as a key architect of the discriminatory policies. Chief Caldwell, increasingly isolated as former allies distanced themselves, attempted to flee the country, but was intercepted by federal agents at Atlanta International Airport as he prepared to board a flight to a non-extradition country. With his passport confiscated and facing multiple federal charges, Caldwell was released on strict bail conditions that included electronic monitoring and travel restrictions. As the leadership that had orchestrated the cover-up faced legal consequences, more victims of police misconduct came forward with their stories. Families who had lost loved ones to excessive force, individuals who had been wrongfully arrested or subjected to discriminatory treatment, and officers who had been punished for reporting misconduct, all added their testimonies to the Grady process of Lazen's growing body of evidence against the department. The collective impact of these stories transformed the public's understanding of what had been happening in Riverside for years, replacing the narrative of isolated incidents with a clear pattern of systematic abuse and discrimination. Marcus's team uncovered a series of internal memos revealing that officers had been instructed to disable body cameras during certain encounters, particularly those involving use of force against minority suspects. The memos, which had been distributed verbally during roll call to avoid creating a paper trail, were corroborated by multiple officers who had received the instructions and by electronic logs showing patterns of camera deactivation that corresponded with excessive force complaints. As the federal investigation expanded, Marcus focused on working with community leaders to draft comprehensive police reform proposals. Collaborating with civil rights attorneys, police accountability experts, and deaf advocacy organizations, he developed a framework for transforming the department's approach to training oversight and community engagement. The proposals included mandatory training for all officers in recognizing and communicating with deaf and disabled individuals, independent civilian oversight, with meaningful investigative authority and transparency requirements for use of force incidents and complaint resolutions. The Zara Daniels case became a rallying point for broader policing reforms nationwide. National politicians began citing the case in speeches about the need for accountability and transparency in law enforcement, while civil rights organizations used the evidence of systematic discrimination in Riverside to advocate for federal legislation establishing national standards for police conduct. Even law enforcement leadership organizations acknowledged that the Riverside case demonstrated the need for reforms to rebuild public trust and ensure that departments operated within constitutional boundaries. Officer Sullivan, facing multiple federal charges and the prospect of decades in prison, agreed to a plea deal that required him to admit to shooting Zara without justification and participating in the subsequent cover-up. In his sworn statement, Sullivan acknowledged that he had targeted deaf individuals because their inability to hear verbal commands gave him a pretext for escalation, confirming Cooper's earlier testimony about this practice. He also implicated Chief Caldwell and Lieutenant Walsh in orchestrating systematic discrimination against minorities, providing specific instances where they had directed officers to focus enforcement efforts on Black and Latino neighborhoods while ignoring similar violations in predominantly white areas. Zara's return to school marked a significant milestone in her recovery. Though she still dealt with physical pain and emotional trauma, she approached this new chapter with remarkable determination and a newfound commitment to advocacy. With support from her teachers and friends, she established a support group for victims of police violence, creating a safe space for sharing experiences and resources for healing. The group quickly grew beyond its original purpose, becoming an advocacy organization that pushed for policy changes and increased awareness about interactions between law enforcement and disabled individuals. Despite the progress in exposing the corruption and building a case for reforms, dangers remained. Marcus received death threats from police supporters and extremist groups who viewed him as an enemy of law enforcement. Security measures around Zara had to be maintained, as intelligence suggested that some individuals remained determined to silence the family or discredit their claims. The most direct attack came when a private security contractor, who had previously worked closely with the department, attempted to assault Marcus during a community forum on police reform. The attacker, identified as Raymond Torres, had been hired by individuals connected to Senator Harrison to send a message about the consequences of challenging the power structure. The attack was thwarted by Marcus's quick reflexes and the intervention of community members, but it underscored the ongoing risks faced by those who dared to confront entrenched corruption. The federal investigation culminated in a major announcement by the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, who revealed that a grand jury had returned indictments against 17 officers and officials connected to the Riverside Police Department and city government. The charges ranged from civil rights violations and obstruction of justice to racketeering and financial crimes, representing one of the most comprehensive police corruption cases in recent history. The indictments announced today allege a criminal conspiracy that corrupted an entire police department and municipal government, the U.S. Attorney stated during a packed press conference. The defendants are accused of systematically violating the constitutional rights of Riverside citizens, particularly those in minority communities, while enriching themselves through fraudulent practices. These charges send a clear message that no one is above the law, including those entrusted with enforcing it. The federal courthouse in Birmingham was surrounded by media trucks and protesters on the opening day of the trial, the culmination of months of investigation and legal preparation. Inside the imposing granite building, the atmosphere was tense as prosecutors laid out their case against the former leadership of the Riverside Police Department and their political allies. This case is about abuse of power in its most fundamental form, the lead prosecutor explained in her opening statement. The defendants systematically violated the constitutional rights of the citizens they swore to protect, specifically targeting minority communities for aggressive enforcement while simultaneously enriching themselves through corrupt practices. They operated not as public servants, but as predators, using badges and authority to victimize the most vulnerable members of society. The defendants, including former Chief Caldwell Lieutenant Walsh and Senator Harrison, sat stoically at the defense table, their once powerful positions now reduced to the status of criminal defendants facing decades in federal prison if convicted. Officer Sullivan, who had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, would be the prosecution's star witness, ready to detail the inner workings of a department where discrimination was policy and brutality was rewarded. The trial proceeded methodically over several weeks, with prosecutors presenting financial records showing the flow of embezzled funds, internal communications, revealing explicit directives to target minority neighborhoods, and testimony from officers who had participated in or witnessed misconduct. The evidence painted a damning picture of institutional corruption that had persisted for years, while city and state officials looked the other way or actively participated in the conspiracy. Zara's testimony came on the third week of the trial, her composed presence in the witness stand belying the anxiety she felt facing the men responsible for her injuries. With an ASL interpreter translating her signs into spoken English for the court, she described the events of that April afternoon in clear, precise detail. "I was walking home through the park like I did every day," she signed her expressions, conveying emotions that transcended language barriers. "I saw the police officers coming toward me with angry faces. I tried to tell them I was deaf by signing, but they looked even angrier. When I reached for my phone to text my dad, Officer Sullivan shot me. I didn't understand what I had done wrong. I still don't understand why they wanted to hurt me." The courtroom fell silent. As photographs of Zara's injuries were displayed, the clinical medical images contrasting sharply with the teenage girl sitting before them, the physical and emotional scars of that day still evident in her cautious movements and watchful eyes. Marcus testified next, providing a methodical account of the department's efforts to cover up the shooting and intimidate his family. His military background and intelligence training were evident in his precise recall of dates, times, and conversations, creating a compelling narrative of systematic obstruction that connected the individual defendants to specific actions in the conspiracy. "After my daughter was shot, I believed that the system would correct itself," he explained to the jury. "I thought that once the facts were known, justice would follow. What I discovered instead was that the system was designed to protect itself at all costs, even if that meant destroying evidence, threatening witnesses, and targeting a child to preserve its power. Multiple officers were convicted on various charges, with sentences reflecting their level of involvement in the corruption. Chief Caldwell received 25 years in federal prison for his leadership role in the criminal conspiracy, while Lieutenant Walsh's cooperation with investigators earned him a reduced sentence of 12 years. Senator Harrison was sentenced to 18 years for his role in facilitating the corruption and obstructing investigations, a stunning fall for a politician who had once been considered a potential gubernatorial candidate. The city of Riverside agreed to a $30 million settlement for Zara, acknowledging not only the physical injuries she had suffered, but the systematic failures that had allowed the shooting to occur and the subsequent attempts to blame her for her own victimization. Rather than using the entire settlement for personal benefit, Zara directed a significant portion toward establishing the Zara Daniels Foundation, created to support deaf children of color and advocate for police reform nationwide. The foundation's first initiative provided communication cards and medical alert accessories to deaf individuals for interactions with law enforcement, while simultaneously funding training programs for police departments on recognizing and effectively communicating with deaf and disabled persons. The case sparked nationwide changes in police protocols for interactions with deaf and disabled individuals. Departments across the country implemented mandatory training programs, with many adopting policies requiring officers to recognize medical alert jewelry and to attempt alternative communication methods before escalating encounters with individuals who might have communication disabilities. Some states went further, passing legislation establishing minimum standards for police training in disability awareness and creating specialized response teams for situations involving mentally ill or disabled individuals. Marcus was offered a position on a federal task force addressing police reform, but declined, preferring to work outside governmental structures where he would have greater freedom to advocate for radical changes. Instead, he established a training program for police departments focused on de-escalation techniques and effective communication with disabled individuals. The program, staffed primarily by former military and law enforcement professionals with disabilities or family members with disabilities, quickly gained national recognition for its practical approach to transforming police culture from within. Zara's physical recovery continued over the following months with additional surgeries to address lingering issues from her injuries. Though she would always carry scars and some permanent limitations in mobility, she regained enough function to resume most of her previous activities. The psychological healing proved more challenging, with PTSD symptoms requiring ongoing therapy and support. She worked with a counselor specializing in trauma recovery for deaf individuals, gradually developing coping strategies that allowed her to manage her anxiety and reclaim her sense of security. As Zara processed her trauma, she discovered a talent for public speaking that surprised even those who knew her best. Using sign language with interpreters, she began addressing conferences and community events, sharing her experience, and advocating for changes in how society and institutions interact with deaf individuals. Her authentic voice and powerful story made her an effective messenger, able to connect with audiences across political and social divides. The community that had rallied around the Daniels family held a ceremony honoring those who had fought for justice, from the witnesses who had come forward despite intimidation to the officers who had broken the blue wall of silence to testify against their colleagues. The event represented not just a celebration of what had been accomplished, but a commitment to continuing the work of reform and reconciliation. Vanessa Rodriguez, whose persistent journalism had helped expose the corruption despite professional consequences, received a prestigious national award for her coverage of the case. Her acceptance speech acknowledged the courage of sources who had risked their careers and safety to provide information, many of whom were in the audience to share in the recognition of their collective achievement. One of the most difficult moments in the aftermath came when Officer Cooper, now reformed and serving as a police trainer, specializing in disability awareness, asked to speak with Marcus. The request presented a complex ethical and emotional challenge, as Cooper had been present during Zara's shooting and had initially participated in the cover-up, though he had later become a crucial witness against his fellow Casper Sins. Officers, Marcus struggled with the decision, torn between his lingering anger and his intellectual understanding of Cooper's eventual cooperation. Ultimately, Zara herself made the decision, expressing a desire to meet with Cooper as part of her own healing process. The conversation between Zara and Cooper became a powerful symbol of accountability and reconciliation, with Cooper apologizing directly for his failure to intervene, and Zara demonstrating extraordinary courage in confronting one of the men present on the worst day of her life. Their dialogue was recorded and later used in police training programs as a profound example of the human consequences of law enforcement decisions. As the dust settled on the legal proceedings and institutional reforms, Marcus found himself reflecting on the painful journey that had begun with a routine walk through a park and escalated into a battle against entrenched corruption. The costs had been enormous, most significantly in Zara's physical and emotional suffering, but the outcomes had exceeded anything he could have imagined at the outset. The final revelation came months after the trials concluded, when financial investigations revealed that one of the key figures who had helped expose the corruption had actually been working against reform from the beginning. Raymond Torres, the security contractor who had attempted to attack Marcus at the community forum, was discovered to have been on Senator Harrison's payroll throughout the investigation, tasked with infiltrating the reform movement to gather intelligence and potentially disrupt their efforts. His decision to attack Marcus had been a desperate attempt to salvage his position after federal investigators began closing in on Harrison's network. The irony was that Torres's actions intended to protect the corrupt system had ultimately contributed to its downfall by generating additional media attention and public sympathy for the reform movement. The story concluded at a national police reform conference, where Zara, now a confident young woman despite the challenges she had overcome, stood before a crowd of law enforcement officials, policymakers, and advocacy organizations. Using ASL with projected subtitles, she delivered a keynote address that balanced accountability for past failures with hope for meaningful change. "What happened to me was not an accident or a misunderstanding." She signed her movements fluid and expressive. It was the predictable result of a system that valued compliance over communication force, over understanding, and power over people. But what happened afterward shows that change is possible when we demand it, when we refuse to accept injustice as inevitable, and when we recognize that true security comes not from fear, but from mutual respect and genuine community. As she concluded her remarks to a standing ovation, Marcus watched from the side of the stage, his expression reflecting the complex mix of pride, sorrow, and determination that had defined their journey. The system that had nearly destroyed them had been transformed, at least in part, by their refusal to be silenced. It wasn't a perfect ending. The scars remained both physical and emotional, but it was a victory that extended far beyond their personal vindication to touch countless lives that would be changed by the reforms their struggle had. Inspired. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have fought the system or focused solely on your child's recovery? Comment below with your thoughts on how far you would go to protect your family and seek justice. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of ordinary people taking extraordinary stands against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of speaking truth to power, even when the odds seem overwhelming. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one father's relentless fight for his daughter and for a system that truly serves and protects all communities equally. The story of Marcus and Zara Daniels illuminates profound truths about justice and accountability in America. When systems designed to protect become tools of oppression, change requires extraordinary courage and strategic action. Marcus demonstrated that one person's refusal to accept injustice can spark nationwide reform, but only through strategic thinking, coalition building, and persistent dedication to truth. The corruption in Riverside didn't develop overnight. It flourished because good people remained silent, because power concentrated without oversight, and because vulnerable communities were seen as acceptable targets. What made Marcus effective wasn't just his specialized skills, but his unwavering commitment to exposing the entire corrupt system rather than seeking personal vengeance. Zara's journey teaches us about resilience in the face of trauma. Despite suffering physical and emotional wounds, she transformed her experience into advocacy, using her voice to ensure others wouldn't face similar injustice. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that accountability is possible even against seemingly untouchable power structures. Systems fail when they prioritize self-preservation over justice and human dignity. Real security comes not from aggressive policing, but from transparency, accountability, and community trust values that require constant vigilance to maintain in a world where power naturally seeks to protect itself. What would you have done if faced with the same injustice as Marcus? Would you have fought the system or focused solely on your child's recovery? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how far you would go to protect your family and seek justice. Has there been a time in your life when you had to stand up against a powerful institution? Share your experience. Your story might inspire others facing similar battles. If this account of courage against corruption moved you, please hit that like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of ordinary people taking extraordinary stands against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of speaking truth to power, even when the odds seem overwhelming. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is refuse to stay silent. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one father's relentless fight for his daughter and for a system that truly serves and protects all communities equally. Remember, justice often begins with a single voice brave enough to speak the truth.